A world at war, an evil attempt to remove an entire race from the planet. And there was the small matter of dropping nuclear bombs. Welcome to the frightening 40s. In the dying months of 1939, the writing was well and truly on the wall. The world was about to enter a period of, let's just say, extreme change. It's difficult now to imagine the surreal sense of foreboding that must have filled the streets in the early 40s. Conversations in the local were no longer about whether Man U or Preston North End were going to win the league. It was more on the lines of, are we going to end up as a suburb of Berlin? The scars of the previous war, the First World War, had barely healed. And now some nutcase psychopath with a stupid moustache who liked dressing up wanted to go and reopen them all over again. But Nazism was an evil racist ideology that had to be sorted. Still, it wasn't all doom and gloom in that far-off decade. The dark clouds thankfully lifted in 1945. With Hitler defeated, there could be a new world order. But the omens of 1939 were correct. If we came through the other side, and thankfully we did, the world would never and could never be the same again. I've chosen 10 memorable 40s flashbacks. Now, not even being a twinkle in somebody's eye in that decade, they're flashbacks that have had an influence on me and, I'm guessing, on you as well. So to my first flashback. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to guess where my roots are. And no, it's not Manchester. It's the East End, and the East End is still a world all on its own. It's full of larger-than-life characters who all claim to have known the craze and who can remember vividly my first flashback, the Blitz.
The Blitz has returned to London with renewed fury, and official opinion is now quoted that the latest sample is the worst yet. The raiders came in with flares and incendiaries, and not all the untiring efforts of firemen and fire watchers could prevent the flames gaining a hold on buildings and scattered areas of the capital. High explosive rained down where the blaze had gained a hold and increased the havoc. London endured once more what provincial cities had recently suffered and passed through the ordeal with equal bravery. For why minimize the facts? We've expected a hard time, and this kind of blitz is only what we expected.
Adolf had obviously never been to the East End, but on September the 7th, 1940, at about 4 o'clock, the distant drone of incoming enemy aircraft was to push the East End fighting spirit to its very limits.
This is not to forget the sympathy due to the victims, to the dead, bereaved, homeless and destitute, victims of the Germans' criminal mania for blood and conquest. But now, a word or two to the government and the powers that be. While the courageous attitude of the British people is beyond praise, it is very important to take note of another aspect of their mood. You don't hear anybody saying, "We can take it" now. Why? Not because it isn't true. We take taking it for granted. But the war has moved on, and the phrase which fits our present sentiment is, they've got it coming to them. They, that is the Germans, have got it coming to them. We can bide our time if we know that sooner or later, preferably sooner, the Germans are going to go through it too. The anxiety and the suspense of watching, the first throbbing note of the Raiders' engine, the bombs, the fires, the collapse of shattered buildings, the strain of firefighting, of rescue and salvage, of physical suffering, death, bereavement, all these things are going to be the lot and portion of the German people. They've got it coming to them. They've chosen this kind of war, and that's what they're going to get.
And the Cockneys weren't left to stand against the Nazi bombers on their own. The royal family insisted on staying in London throughout the Blitz. The Queen Mother even visited the East End on more than one occasion. As she said, she wanted to be able to look the East End in the eye.
Sequel to the Big Blitz, the visit of Their Majesties the King and Queen to districts in East London which suffered very severely. The royal visitors were wholeheartedly welcomed everywhere they went. And everywhere they went, Their Majesties saw and admired the spirit of the people, that unconquerable spirit which will win the war.
That first terrible night was followed by another 57 days of continual bombing. And we moan about leaves on the line making us late for work. The skies, though, did eventually fall silent. That was on May the 11th, 1941, when Hitler needed his planes to go and have a pop at the Russians. When the smoke cleared, London was one huge bomb site. But no one really cared due to the all-consuming relief everyone felt. For those who still had one, at least they could now sleep soundly in their own beds.
Here they are, some of the immense crowds on their way to Wembley Stadium to enjoy the pageantry, the music and the ceremony on the day of the opening of the Olympic Games. Mercifully, the English summer had arrived a couple of days earlier, and the weather was blazing hot for the start of the 14th modern Olympiad. This was the second time that London had welcomed athletes and their supporters for such an outstanding event in the world of sport. And the scene at Wembley was one that will long be remembered by all who were present. After tremendous cheering had greeted the arrival of the King, His Majesty went down to the arena, accompanied by Mr. Edstrom, President of the International Olympic Committee, and Lord Burleigh, Chairman of the Organising Committee. Members of both committees were presented.
And so on to my next personal flashback. Now, if you're into tripping the light fantastic these days, it involves you and a group of mates arriving at a club at an hour when most people are going to bed, then working up a sweat resembling the Aswan Dam until sunup. Of course, things were a lot different in the far more sedate 1940s because they had music, proper music, and something you don't see a lot of these days, musicians who actually played real instruments, because this was the era of the big band and the music was swing. Those who supplied it were musical geniuses. Even their names sounded magical. Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Glenn Miller. Well, maybe not Glenn Miller, but to dance the night away to the strains of a big band must have been totally enchanting. If you couldn't pull with a 40-piece orchestra swinging its heart out for you, then there was something very wrong with you.
Uncle Sam and Britannia, John Bull and Liberty were the leading figures at a recent fraternization and get-together dance at Winchester. There are quite a few Americans in Britain now, you may have noticed. Shows like this combined ops dance are just one way of cementing Anglo-American relations over here. Fraternization was the order of the day, and it certainly looks as if everything was going according to plan. Fraternization on the dance floor and off it. See what I mean?
Sadly, dance hall owners didn't take long to cotton on to the big bands. 40 people to pay. A rock and roll band, 5 people to pay. A DJ, 1 person. So it really is all about money. And I don't know about you, but having the option every now and again would be so nice. Just to know that when the mood took you, when you were in the mood, you could head for Tuxedo Junction and catch the Chattanooga Choo-Choo. So to my next most memorable flashback, and I've always thought it strange that the man who got us through probably this country's bleakest time, the greatest Prime Minister we've ever had, Winston Spencer Churchill, was unceremoniously booted out as soon as the war was over. Now that's gratitude for you.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.
Britain's great war premier was tireless. Indeed, he worked unceasingly to carry out his declared policy of victory, whatever the cost.
We cannot yet see how deliverance will come, or when it will come. But nothing is more certain than that every trace of Hitler's footsteps, every stain of his infected and corroding fingers will be sponged and purged, and if need be, blasted from the surface of the earth.
The burdens of war leadership were immense. Not the least important of his duties were his journeys to battlefronts and conferences with Allied leaders. His cooperation with President Roosevelt was vital to victory. In addition, his own maxim was that anyone who fought against Hitler was a friend. When victory at last drew near, Winston Churchill went to the continent to see for himself. How he must have enjoyed crossing the Rhine. After victory, however, the man who had done so much to achieve it was turned down at the general election.
Enter stage left a relatively unknown politician, Clement Attlee. He did get the job as Deputy Prime Minister in 1942, though, within Churchill's coalition government. Labour leader Clem was a sly old dog because he managed to convince the nation that while Winston was undoubtedly a great wartime leader, he wouldn't have a clue about running the country if we weren't fighting someone. And we bought it. The nation wanted change. Clem called himself the Great Rebuilder. And with the sound of bullets still ringing in the air, his Labour Party swept to power in 1945.
Landslide.
Here is the state of parties up to 3 o'clock in detail. Conservatives, 180. Labour, 364.
At Woodford, Mr. Churchill was declared elected, Mrs. Churchill representing him, for he had planned to hear the results from headquarters. And what he heard in his own case was a 17,000 majority. That perhaps was poor consolation, but no doubt Winston Churchill can take it. There will be universal regret that the gifts of so brilliant a statesman will be forfeited by this election, and this regret will be shared, despite hard words, by his opponents. At East Lewisham, Mr. Herbert Morrison was elected and gave his interpretation of the result.
I personally have always thought that there was no necessary antagonism between Labour and what are known as the middle classes. East Lewisham is a mixed division of working class folk and middle class folk. And we have shown here, as will be shown in other places, that the middle classes need not necessarily be antagonistic to Labour. The news is that there is a big swing to the left throughout London and probably throughout the country in this election.
And outside Transport House, the headquarters of the Labour Party, Mr. Attlee summed up for Movietone the situation as it appeared to a man about to be Prime Minister.
The Labour Party's great victory shows that the country is ready for a new policy to face new world conditions. That it believes that Labour has the right policy and also has the men to carry it out.
So why is he one of my personal flashbacks? Simple. It's down to him and his government that we've got the NHS.
This leaflet is coming through your letterbox one day soon, or maybe you have already had your copy. Read it carefully. It tells you what the new National Health Service is and how you can use what it offers. Remember, all the leaflet says. Get an application form from any post office, complete it, and send it to your doctor. If the doctor you have chosen can look after you under the new scheme which starts on July the 5th, he will sign the form and return it to you. Study the leaflet, then keep it by you. You'll need it for reference.
I know what you're thinking. What NHS? But think about it. It may not be perfect, but life without it. And Clement didn't stop there. He nationalised the Bank of England and came up with the revolutionary idea of the National Insurance Scheme.
On July the 5th, the National Insurance Scheme begins. And to run the scheme smoothly, everyone must have a contribution card and a national insurance number. Watch the newspapers, and if the announcements apply to you, get a national insurance application form from any employment exchange or post office. When you've filled it in, send it to the nearest employment exchange. And in return, you will get a contribution card, which will be the key to your benefits under the scheme. Read the instructions carefully, look after the card, and remember that the number is important. Help the ministry to help you. Watch the newspapers for full details and apply without delay.
Not many can make the claim, but for my money, Clement Attlee changed the way this country is shaped today. Not only did he make sure we could have our warts removed and eyes tested for free, he also did his bit on the world stage. He was a key player in the formation of NATO and also in the dismantling of the British Empire. He also had the little problem of raising Britain from the ashes with a huge rebuilding programme. The boys coming home from the war couldn't use a hero's welcome to live in. Now, my next flashback is a subject I know a little about, because those of you that read the Quality Sunday papers may know that one of my part-time jobs is reviewing movies. These days, it's the accountants that run the movie business, not the movie makers. But not so in the 1940s. Filmmakers made them then because they loved them, and so did we. Great stories, great actors, and, as today, some of the best technicians in the world. And let's face it, with the greatest conflict the world had ever seen, not bad subject matter. But while they may not have had the money men calling the shots, they did have the war cabinet to worry about. The silver screen was a huge propaganda weapon, and movie makers did their part in keeping the nation united and in a positive frame of mind. Olivier gave us his Henry V, once more unto the beach, dear friends, and all that Shakespearean stuff. And Noel Coward raised our spirits with his classic movie In Which We Serve, directed by David Lean. Now, when the war started, we all know the Americans weren't exactly rushing to get involved. So filmmakers desperately tried to warn the Yanks, through film, the danger posed to them by the Nazis. In 1940, Alfred Hitchcock tried to coax the Americans into an alliance with his movie Foreign Correspondent. And in 1941, Darryl Zanuck made A Yank in the RAF. No prizes for guessing what that was about. It was a blatant attempt to woo the American public. And Walt Disney helped out too. He made training and propaganda films and even went on goodwill tours to keep morale up. Those left at home also became the filmmakers' subjects. Mrs. Miniver in 1942 was about a middle-class family struggling through the war, and it showed the viewing public that they too could do their part. Let's face it, after 6 terrible years, Britain needed a laugh, and a talented team of writers and technicians parked themselves in Ealing to come up with a string of gentle but forever memorable comedies. Kind Hearts and Coronets, Passport to Pimlico, Whiskey Galore, to name but a few. It's the oldest cliche in the book, but it's true. They don't make them like that anymore. By the 1940s, Britain's greatest ever film director, Sir Alfred Hitchcock, was working in Hollywood, and he entered the darkest and most experimental phase of his career with Rope. Shot in 1948, starring James Stewart, the film is done in continuous takes with no cuts or edits. It's a masterpiece.
I just think we ought to wait till after you graduate.
I don't.
It's only a month.
Janet, a month?
Please.
It's all right. I personally consider us engaged as of now. Congratulations.
David, no.
Look, you can say yes in a taxi. I have a 2:30 appointment
I'm
and you're...
staying right here.
Oh, afraid you'll say yes?
I'll see you tonight at Brandon's party.
Okay. You can say yes, sir, just as well as in a taxi. Goodbye, darling.
Bye.
That's the last time she ever saw him alive. And that's the last time you'll ever see him alive. What happened to David Kentley changed my life completely, and the lives of 7 others. Janet Walker, Henry Kentley, the boy's father, his aunt, Mrs. Atwater, his best friend, Kenneth Lawrence, a housekeeper named Mrs. Wilson, and the 2 who were responsible for everything, Brandon Shaw and Philip Morgan.
Mouse, cat and mouse.
Philip.
Which is the cat and which is the mouse?
Enough of that.
He's got it. He knows. He knows.
All right.
He knows. Easy. I'll take care of you. Won't. I'd just as soon kill you as kill him.
Rope was based on a true story, a 1920s murder case, which also inspired Sandra Bullock's recent hit, Murder by Numbers.
Of clothes came as a pretty violent bill, and most of there's evidence that coupons were used, but some reports said that they were almost entirely ignored. Anyway, what will result from this drastic rationing scheme? Clothes will be made to last longer for one thing, and the greatest care must be taken of them. Look out, sir, look out! Then second-hand clothes will be in great demand. It'll be just too bad for the gent who can't be suited.
What did you have to eat today? Big fry-up maybe for breakfast? A couple of cups of tea or coffee? Then a nice little snack, bar of chocolate perhaps? Maybe a pub lunch? And for dinner, a nice takeaway curry or chicken and chips or a kebab. Now let me tell you what you would have had if this were 1942. Scrambled eggs, wait, made with powdered egg and powdered milk, a square of chocolate once a month, lunch, maybe some vegetable soup because there were as many turnips as you could eat, and after a hard day's work, an appetising plate of tripe and onions. Ugh. Rationing, a concept so alien to us young types, like Victoria Beckham not knowing where Bond Street is. Believe it or not, and I didn't know this, most of our food was and still is brought in from overseas, and ships have a very nasty habit of sinking when they're hit by German U-boats. Also, many countries where we purchased food were occupied, so rationing was introduced. The government wanted to make it all fair, because shortages usually mean prices go through the roof, so they had to find a way that meant those who had a few quid were the only ones who got something to eat.
I am a man of the people, and no doubt what I have had to say to you has been a great blow. You all know by now the position of the food problem of the world, and we as an importing country are part of that world problem. We are an importing country, and like all other importing countries, have to obtain our supplies from overseas. And therefore, for a time, we must go short. I know that our farmers will do their utmost to give us more wheat, and I rely upon you to do your best to save food. Save bread. Don't waste a crumb.
It worked as a coupon system. Everybody, even children, had their own coupon book. This bought you your food, clothes and fuel. And Mum usually looked after all the books so she could mix and match to make the jigsaw work. Food was rationed by weight or by cost. You could have, say, 8 ounces a week of sugar, but meat was rationed by cost. So I'd be able to have per week 1 10 worth of meat, 3 pints of milk, half a pound of sugar, 4 ounces of butter or fat, 4 ounces of bacon, 2 ounces of tea and 1 ounce of cheese and eggs. Scary, eh? Talk about an instant diet. One thing that came out of rationing was the art of cutting corners and making do, baking cakes without butter or sugar, for instance. The government even brought out a book, 101 Things You Can Make with Powdered Egg. And thanks to rationing, we were introduced to some new delicacies like corned beef and spam.
Well, as everyone knows, the question of dried eggs was the straw that almost broke the housewife's back. That and the everlasting queuing. Ask any housewife who's put up with queues and controls for 6 years of war what she thinks today, and this is her answer.
A few weeks ago, I read in the newspaper that we were going to get more food. Now it seems it's going to be less fat. And if we get much less, there'll be none at all. We didn't like the dried egg at first, but we got used to them, and it's going to be very hard to do without them. It's queue for everything. In fact, it's far worse now than it was during the war.
My next flashback, I make no apology for. It's shamelessly aimed at us lads. Picture the scene. A scientist, an old bloke, goes to see his boss and says, "Sir, I have finished my work and I've established the basic principles of condensation, polymerization, radical polymerization and the structural condensation of polymers." To which his boss, not a little puzzled, replied, "Wallace," because that was his name, Dr. Wallace H. Carruthers, "Wallace, what do your findings mean?" "Well," says Wallace, "it means the male species will never be the same again." "Oh," said his boss, "why, pray tell?" "Because," says Wallace, "I've just invented nylon stockings."
More good news, though perhaps a bit tantalizing, is provided by these pictures from a nylon stocking factory in Britain. Proof that machines are hard at work knitting what most women regard as indispensable because the stockings, heels and all, are so hard-wearing. Here girls are on the job of looping and linking heels and toes. British girls in a British factory, so the goods will be available for sterling, not dollars. And although no girl would own to a leg that shape, this is part of the process of stretching these protein-like chemical products into the most desirable, fully fashioned hosiery. In the shaping and drying room, the stockings go through a process peculiar to nylon. In fact, this is the only point at which manufacture differs from that of other kinds of stockings. When will you get a pair? Well, I'd rather not commit myself, but more of them are coming onto the market soon, though perhaps not in the quantities we'd all like to see. Here's a pair being tried on, apparently during office hours. The picture tells the story how to win friends and influence people. Men will, of course, be observing the lack of wrinkles round the foot.
So on the 15th of May 1940, nylon stockings went on sale, and on that first day, 780,000 pairs were sold. Wallace was right. Things for us lads have never been the same since. Oh, just making sure they fit the wife. Anyway, the war got slightly in the way because nylon was needed for tyres and parachutes, so stockings became the main item offered by spivs on the black market. Then some bright entrepreneurial spark came up with the stocking pack, which came in 4 different colours, a bit like foundation cream or body paint, and women smeared that stuff all over their legs. Also in the kit was a black pencil which gave the line on the back of the legs like a seam, but not to be drawn in after a couple of sweet sherries. As soon as the war was over and people didn't need to jump out of planes, stockings were back in the shops, and in 1947, good old Marks and Spencer added them to its garment ranges.
Certainly is a long time since we've seen legs looking like that. Perhaps I should say stockings looking like that. Nice tops they've got. Tantalizing, isn't it? They actually fit. Sorry, no good calling at the box office afterwards. We don't know where you can find them. Real nylon and fully fashioned. Very nice to see again from any angle.
If you're watching this and are close to my age or younger, you'll know this next section is going to be a bit tough for me. Tough to find the words to introduce a flashback of an event that dominated the decade and changed the world as we know it today, World War II.
In this historic hour, the fate of Europe and perhaps the whole world trembles in the balance. The map of Europe, which has been so ruthlessly changed during the recent years of so-called peace, has now become increasingly a matter of vital interest to each and every one of us. Austria and Czechoslovakia, not to mention Abyssinia and Albania, have changed hands with appalling facility. Throughout this time, Britain has held tenaciously to her belief that there is no problem that cannot be solved by peaceful negotiation. Were this opinion shared by the Chancellor of the German Reich, it would not now be necessary for Britain to stand to arms and cry halt. Aggression must be stopped. In our great democracy, even crisis may be dignified by traditional procedure, and Parliament is recalled to meet the emergency. The Polish ambassador and the German chargé d'affaires, Herr Kort, called together at 10 Downing Street. Here, as ever in critical days, is seen the coming and going of the leaders of the country. Meanwhile, the country continues its preparations, resigned to the apparently inevitable. Such scenes as these are familiar not only to us, but to the peace-loving citizens of every country in Europe. It is a tragic thought that the menace of the air should instill the fear of death and destruction into the peoples of all nationalities, whether destined to be friend or foe or neutral. But Britain is prepared, ready to shoulder her responsibilities and face every peril which may be forthcoming. The personnel of the defense forces has increased rapidly in the face of danger. The anti-aircraft units, efficient and magnificently organized, inspire that utmost confidence which we know to exist in these isles. Everywhere, the evidence of preparedness is to be found. Gone, for instance, are the bearskins and the scarlet tunics of the Guards. In their place, service kit of steel helmet and khaki.
Now, I know a bit about swing music, I certainly know about nylon stockings, and I'm something of an expert on the Ealing comedies. But what do I know about getting a letter dropping through the door, calling you up to join the army? What do I know about facing someone in combat and having to make a life or death decision about whether or not I can pull the trigger? What do I know about losing close family and friends? Nothing. What I do know is we should never forget.
Victory year. How can so tremendous a period be reviewed in a few minutes? Only by taking its highlights, its very highest lights. A few mighty events overshadowed all the rest. VE, victory in Europe. Mr. Churchill announced it.
We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe Day.
Britain took his words to heart. Never was there such a day of genuine rejoicing. The weather was in harmony with the occasion. It was a perfect spring day, and the celebrations continued far, far into the night.
(1939 to 1945) was, without a doubt, when the world went dark. But have we learnt anything? Well, at this very moment there are over 100 wars happening right across the globe. The world order is now under permanent threat from a new evil, terrorism. Racial cleansing happened right under our noses in Central Europe. Developing countries now have nuclear capability, and religious fundamentalism can make teenagers strap bombs to themselves. Have we learnt anything? I know what I think. My next momentous flashback is pure boy's own stuff. If it hadn't happened, Hollywood would have invented it. It was one of the most daring and ingenious events of the war. It needed the meeting of minds of a brilliant scientist and a supreme pilot. Wing Commander Guy Gibson and Barnes Wallis would combine their skills and become known as the Dam Busters. Now, the Ruhr Valley was a hotbed of Nazi activity. There were munitions, industrial sites, even hydroelectric plants that powered cities like Dortmund, Dusseldorf and Munster. If the dams in the valley could be destroyed, the effect on the Nazis would be immense. But nor wouldn't work, because the dams had to hit near their base if they were to collapse and cave in. So Gibson set about hand-picking his pilots to fly Lancasters, the only planes big enough to take the weight of the bombs required. But they weren't built to fly so low off the ground. Only the RAF's finest could pull it off. Barnes Wallis, meanwhile, was still fine-tuning what became known as the bouncing bomb. Now, for it to work, the planes had to sit just 60 feet above the water. And that was your first problem. How do you know exactly how high the plane is? Well, Wallis came up with a dual spotlight idea. The beams crossed exactly at 60 feet below the planes. Then there was the bomb itself. It was a massive 9,250-pound cylindrical weapon which, when released, rotated backwards. This caused the bombs to skip along the water and, in theory, hit the dam just above the waterline. There's an apocryphal story that says that Wallis got the idea while watching some kids skimming stones across the sea. Now, after a sometimes frustrating training period, a date was fixed for the raids, May the 16th and May the 17th, 1943. 2 nights with full moons.
I've got news. Bomber Command struck last night a heavy blow of a new kind at the sources of German war power.
That's how the Air Secretary broke the great news. And here's Wing Commander Gibson on the right, who led the attack. A member of his crew helps with his harness before the takeoff. No film of this terrific achievement has been received, but with still pictures and illustrative film, Movietone reconstructs the attack, which was made by 19 Lancasters, 8 of which did not return. The bursting of a great dam obviously presents tremendous difficulty. Yet the result of the success, as the whole world now knows, means an even greater dividend than the heaviest attack on most other targets. This is the Ada Dam, showing part of the great volume of water contained by it and the 2 power stations below it. When it was breached by the RAF mines, the millions of gallons of water from the Weser and Fulda valleys poured through into a devastating orgy of flooding. Here's a scene taken by reconnaissance aircraft after the attack. Roads and railways were submerged, almost everything was underwater. The Mona Dam, before the attack. That's the power station below it. Aerial reconnaissance obtained an amazing picture of the actual breach in the dam. Here it is, a breach at least 100 yards long, and the power station has been swept away. And now the water's on a wild rampage in the center of industrial Germany, flooding, smashing, destroying. Chaos piled on chaos. Freudenberg-Boisberda, 13 miles from the dam, shows some of the extent of the floods. Germany would do well to remember what Air Marshal Harris said at the time of the 1,000-bomber raids.
When the storm bursts over Germany, they will look back to the days of Lübeck and Rostock and Cologne, as a man caught in the blasts of a hurricane will look back to the gentle zephyrs of last summer.
The Dam Busters raid was, for me, the most daring and brilliant air attack of the Second World War. It was, of course, immortalised in that great movie, The Dam Busters. But it happened at a great cost. 53 aircrew were killed, 3 were taken prisoner, but their objective was totally achieved. Widespread flooding. The vast valley region ground to a halt. Hitler had to divert 100,000 of his troops there. But the strategic win was equalled at home. The raid had a huge effect on morale. Could it be the tide was turning? Maybe, at last, things were beginning to go our way. When the global conflict ended, workers returned home and manufacturers could switch production back to consumer goods, especially the motor car. Now, Henry Ford, the father of mass production, died in 1947, but in the next year, 1948, the British arm of his operation introduced a classic, the very first Ford Anglia. And meanwhile, throughout the decade, the good old Austin 7 kept trundling off the production line.
News, for his name was known throughout the globe. He died at the age of 83. Here he is on his 79th birthday, looking over the first car that was to make him famous. His grandson, Henry Ford II, succeeds him and presumably inherits much of the colossal family fortune. Ford made millions, yes, but he gave employment to millions, and millions more benefited from his work.
The controversial Air Force leader Bomber Harris had certainly made his mark on most of the major German industrial centres. But our cities had also taken a hell of a pounding from the Luftwaffe. Whole chunks of London were levelled. Coventry, Bristol, Leicester and Birmingham were unrecognisable. They were just piles of rubble. The boys were coming home and they needed a roof over their heads. So the architects seized the opportunity to rewrite the town planning rule books.
Almost unnoticed by its citizens, London, like many other devastated cities in Britain, is being rebuilt. Of course, those large gaps left by the Blitz are going to take a long time to fill, but even alongside St. Paul's, where there's one of the biggest and most hideous gaps of all, a new building is springing up. Some of the construction is on blitzed areas, but there are cases where old, intact property is coming down to make way for new. The demolition of Westminster Hospital opened up a new vista of the Abbey, so delightful that letters were written to the papers protesting against the erection of a new government office to crowd it out again. The Gaiety Theatre is condemned and will be replaced by offices. Of the new structures, a great number are intended to house government departments to serve the various new corporations which have come into being. Some buildings have made rapid progress in the course of a few months, as in this operation in New Oxford Street. Every now and then you find some artistic work in progress. The most publicized of the new construction has, of course, been the new chamber of the House of Commons. But work is still proceeding on another part of the Palace of Westminster, which has been going on so long that I suppose few of us can remember the Victoria Tower when it was not in splints. From here you can get some delightful views of London, taken in the summer but nonetheless acceptable in the middle of winter. You can also get some precarious glimpses of the traffic in Old Palace Yard below. But the point is that the old city is slowly rebuilding and healing its scars in the process. It's certainly a grand old city.
There's so much to think about when you've won a war. Rebuilding cities, getting the country back to work, and what are you going to sit on when you eat your dinner? Oh yeah, furniture was a major problem. Now, we'd already become machine-orientated before the war. Radios took over from the piano in the parlour, fridges from the cold store, and the vacuum cleaner from good old-fashioned elbow grease with a dustpan and brush. But thanks to the war, there were new materials, tubular steel, bent plywood and aluminium, for example. But they weren't much use if you couldn't make anything and no one could afford it. All this had to be put in a big melting pot. Someone had to come up with a plan to make quick, cheap furniture. Gordon Russell, the bloke who had designed the boxes around the Murphy Richards radio series, was given the arduous task of heading up a team to implement the lead from the Domestic Furniture Act. Oh yeah, it was that serious. And a new term entered design language: utility furniture.
Though the changeover from war to peace production may seem slow, it has begun. Materials like plexiglass, perspex and so on are already beginning to find their way into homes. Everything in this American picture, which appears to be made of glass, is made of the same stuff they used for turrets in aircraft and many other war purposes. It's easily handled, very light and nearly unbreakable. Plastic hats are also being made now. Whether they'll catch on or not remains to be seen. In Britain, too, the changeover is beginning. For example, this mosquito factory at Walthamstow. Planes were still being made, but wartime schedules were fairly rapidly making way for the manufacture of other things. Mosquito-making machinery was on the way out. Jigs were going to the scrap heap. In fact, here, where furniture-making craftsmen took over the job of making one of the war's most successful aircraft, they're now building furniture again. Utility furniture, and as you see, they've got some nice labor-saving machinery to help with the work. Even if it's utility furniture for priority customers only on the point system, we can all take it as a hint that peace production is on the way. It seems pretty obvious we've all got to be very patient. The idea that peace and plenty would return together just wasn't true. Exports, too, are urgent. Whiskey is one of the exports that did very useful war work and is still carrying on. One thing, we may not get the whiskey here at home, but, well, we don't get the hangover either.
As soon as people had a few pounds in the 50s, most utility furniture ended up in a skip. And anything that has survived is now highly collectible. Now, my next 40s flashback smells of salt and vinegar and will give you sand between your toes. Because in the middle of the 40s, people wanted to forget their troubles and it was boom time for Britain's coastal resorts. You had Blackpool, Skegness and Scarborough in the north, and in the south, Hastings, Clacton and the daddy of them all, Brighton.
It happened to be fine weather, but I expect London stations would have been like this anyway, for the vast majority of people intended to make the most of their first post-war Easter. As it was, the people put up with the crush, and the railways coped with the people. Luxury travel, by the way, has returned in the shape of the Golden Arrow train, in which you can travel in complete comfort to the coast. After crossing the Channel, you board the train again in France. If only this kind of travel were typical of journeys everywhere in Britain. But, well, maybe that's too much to hope for yet. In the north, at New Brighton, for example, the Easter holiday was enjoyed in the good old-fashioned way, much as it used to be before the war, in fact. Some of the joys here, however, are not recommended to those who may happen to have a hangover. Windsor Castle drew large crowds to wish Princess Elizabeth many happy returns of the day. She celebrated her 20th birthday during the holiday, and one of her engagements was a visit to the race meeting at Hurst Park. Here, rising light failed to bring off the strongly anticipated victory for the King in the Paradise Stakes. Many thousands of racegoers were there with King and Princess to enjoy themselves, win or lose. Indeed, race meetings at many places were a big feature of Easter holiday sport. And, of course, the River Thames claimed many holiday makers who no doubt preferred this more leisurely and peaceful type of relaxation. They gambled on the weather and won handsomely. No review of Easter 1946 would be complete without at least a flying visit to Brighton. At last, this ever-popular stretch of South Coast had come into its own again. In spite of all the reports of queues, and perhaps more than a touch of austerity in the matter of refreshment here and there, everyone had a good time, it seems. No bombs or doodlebugs, the seafront more or less restored, families together once more, and plenty of sunshine. Just what the doctor ordered. Eventually, however, it was time to wake up and join the queue for the journey back to work. We'd had it.
And for me, Brighton is still the king of them all, the home of the Kiss Me Quick hat and the saucy postcard.
We're starting up, now we're on our way, leaving all our yesterdays behind. Something special that we want to say, happiness is just a state of mind. Flashback to the days when the nights were young. Flashback when we could do no wrong. Flashback we used to dance till the light of dawn. Flashback when our hearts were so strong.
So there you have it, a fascinating little decade. And in true flashback tradition, it's now in my gift to select my fave memory. And while I considered a second look at the glories of powdered egg and utility furniture, in the end, there wasn't any competition, was there? See you in the next decade.
We're starting up, now we're on our way, leaving all our yesterdays behind. Something special that we wanna say, happiness is just a state of mind. Flashback.